Hi, everybody. Now I'm going to talk about what makes a news story, how you write a news story. One way to think of news stories is that they're not really creative stories necessarily. They're more like a series of facts collected and arranged in a logical manner than they are kind of a story with a beginning, middle, and end. They can be for certain situations and that sort of thing, but by and large, they're a collection of information arranged in a way that logically makes sense. And other things to consider too in the arrangement of which I'll talk about here in a second. The first element in a news story that I want to talk about is the lead, which is the most important, really, and it really sets the tone for the rest of the piece. The lead needs to sum up the main point of the story in a short paragraph. Um, States the story very clearly, very broadly, and very directly. News stories follow a format, a form that's known as the inverted pyramid. If I were teaching this in a classroom, I would draw an upside down triangle on the screen to show you what the structure of a common news story should be. So you have the big wide end at the top and the point at the bottom. And what this signifies is that a news story begins with the broadest, most general information, a complete overview of the story. And then as it continues, it becomes narrower and narrower with more and more specific details to sort of fill out a reader's understanding of the story, right? Um, Inverted pyramid, starting with the broadest and ending with the point. So the lead is, one way I like to describe the lead is, a lead is a lot like the marketing lines for movies. So if you go to see a movie and you watch a bunch of previews, there's always that guy with a deep voice who says in one sentence or two what the whole movie is about. In a world where darkness is light and light is dark, three men find their way to happiness, or something ridiculous like that. It's like the whole story in one nutshell. And then as the story continues, they give more and more details and details. Let me share the screen with you here, and we'll look at a story from the New York Times. Here's a story: Watchdog to examine whether Justice Department helped Trump effort to overturn election. So in the first paragraph here, we have here Washington and this dash. This is what's called a timeline. This is where the story was reported on and written. And then the first paragraph is: the Justice Department watchdog announced Monday that he had opened an investigation into whether any of the department's officials tried to undo the results of the presidential election as scrutiny of former President Donald J. Trump and his associates builds ahead of his impeachment trial. So basically, you have the whole gist of the story right there. The watchdog started this trial, and it's part of this bigger scrutiny of the president leading up to the impeachment trial, right? And then as we go on, they kind of get more in detail. Like they kind of start over and say, the investigation by the department's inspectors general followed efforts by Mr. Trump to do da 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 da. We're getting a little bit more specific. And then we have a quote here that where the inspector general states what he's trying to accomplish here. All right. So there's some components here in this story that are going to be in every news story. And one, like I said in the previous video about what is news, is that a story must answer 5 essential questions, and ideally 6. The first 5 are who, what, when, where, and how. And then the 6th is why. That can sometimes be tougher to get. But let's see if they can get it here. Who? The Justice Department watchdog, right? Who we find out is Michael Horowitz. That's the who. What? He announced Monday that he had opened an investigation into whether department officials tried to undo the election result. That's what. When? Monday. He did it Monday. How? No, where? Washington. We have the tagline here. How? we start getting into more of the details here. The investigation by the departments, we get more information about how it went down. Okay, who, what, when, where, and how. And then why. Well, to push other department leaders, it said to consider, the why is because of this stuff that happened before where Trump was said to have talked to this Jeffrey Clark guy. So just a step back, every story should be who, what, when, where, how, and ideally why. All right. Okay, then as far as once you have the lead together in a story, which is the hardest part, then the rest of it should kind of try and be able to kind of write itself. And the way I like to think about approaching a news story is think about it in terms of I have a bunch of different boxes, imaginary boxes, and I put in each of these boxes some information, similarly grouped information. So some of the information in this story might be how the investigation came together. Put all that information about that into the how it all came together box. What are all the specifics that are going to happen? Let's see, wait a second, here we go. Here's how it came together. Here's a quote about how it came together. Here's a section where how does it fit in with other things that are going on? So that's another box where you might put stuff. You might put in what could be the possible impact of what goes on with this investigation. You might have a box that is all what different people say about it. Like Republicans might say one thing, you might have a box about what Republicans say, and another box about what Democrats say. And then the task is to take those boxes and arrange them so that they have kind of a natural flow to lead readers through the information all the way to the end of the story. Which kind of brings us back to the inverted pyramid philosophy. Some of the reason why we do the inverted pyramid are, one, it fits in with how people read news. As people, I'm going to pull my picture up here. As people read through a newspaper or website, they'll kind of skim through, find an article that they want to read, get into it, and oftentimes they'll read just a couple paragraphs, and then they feel like they have enough information, they can move on to the next one. That's the inverted pyramid. They want to give as much information so that anybody can understand the story, and if they leave a couple paragraphs in, they have all they need to know for themselves. But if they want to go further and get more specific details, read down the inverted pyramid, it's available for them. Another reason why it's done this way is because it harkens kind of back to the old days of when everything was in print, and a paper might not have enough space to put a whole story in. And they didn't have time because they have to go to press to send it back to the editor and rework the story so that everything fits in at a shorter length. They want to be able to just cut off the end and know that it's not going to impact the story at all. So that's another reason for why they do the inverted pyramid. All right. So that's kind of an overview of how they're put together. I'm going to share the screen again here for a second. Another important thing I want to talk about is quotes. News stories should, to the full extent possible, have some kind of quote in it, some quotes from people in it. And the reason for this is twofold. One is that news writing, by definition, needs to be in a kind of detached, neutral tone, devoid of emotion, mostly just sticking to the facts and that sort of thing. So quotes allow us to bring in the human element, kind of a human voice, colloquial sayings. It also allows us to bring opinions in. We can let other people say opinions because a news writer is not supposed to have their own opinions. So quotes do this, serve this purpose. Another thing I want to point out is the way that quotes should be structured. Here we have a quote in this paragraph. It takes up this paragraph. And it begins with the first part of the quote. If Trump loses credibility because it appears he's acted in a way that no one can justify, the leverage that he might have over the Republican Party could be diffused, comma, end quote, said William Marshall, a professor at the University of North Carolina who teaches and writes on presidential power. And then the rest of the quote, the more that indicates he behaved improperly makes it less easy to defend him and less easy to stand by him. All right, so this is the way I like to see you put your quotes together. It's not like academic writing where you have a footnote and a bibliography, endnotes, and that kind of thing. You use a journalistic style, and that is that you start with the quote itself. You want to start with the most interesting part. But as people are reading, they're going to want to know who it is that's saying it and why are they saying it in this article. So you want to give the person's name and their title as soon as you can, which is usually at the first point where you can break a sentence or a clause. And then after you give that, then you give the rest of the quote, right? So it's a way of sort of embedding the attribution within it so that it's more pleasant to read, more easy to read, and you get all the information while getting the impact of the quote. Then lastly, writing style for news stories. You'll see that the sentences are very simple and declarative. So we have a subject, the Justice Department watchdog, verb, right? Modifiers of the verb, and then announced that he had opened an investigation, and then the object of it. So simple, straightforward, not as many of these sort of backing in sentences. Things go straightforward and simple. The other thing you'll notice is that the paragraphs are generally short in news stories. This facilitates reading quickly. It's easier to scan. It's more befitting of your audience. The last thing to point out is that a news story should avoid at all costs opinions expressed by the writer themselves. Opinions should only be expressed through quotes. The job of a reporter, of a news writer, is to be objective and to be kind of a detached hand. So that's a brief overview of what a news story is. You're going to learn a lot more with this first exercise where I'm having you go out and find 10 stories and analyze how they're constructed. That's going to be the best way for you to see how they're done. And then, of course, even more so when you imitate the style doing your fake news story, it'll be due in a week or so. All right. Thank you all for paying attention, and we'll see you next time.